Will be a rush to beat the deadline. That's going to happen, isn't it?
I think it will, yes. I think a lot of people in Europe who may have considered coming to Britain before will probably see it now as their last chance to actually give life in the UK a try. And I think Dermot Moynihan was completely correct in that clip there, that David Davis, the fact that he says that there will be a point at which they will cut it off has, of course, caused that anxiety in a lot of people. But I think also a lot of people will be very, very concerned about what their immigration status is when they're already in the EU. I have a lot of friends from the EU who've moved here, they're my age, they work, and now they're very, very concerned over whether or not they can stay here, whether or not their partners can stay here, whether or not it's actually worth working in the UK for much longer.
Douglas Murray, we assume there'll be a rush to beat the deadline. What we do know from experience is it's notoriously difficult to actually predict numbers. We think back, for instance, 2004, the Home Office had that study suggesting how many EU migrants would move to the UK. I think it was in the low thousands. We ended up with hundreds of thousands.
Absolutely. It's very unpredictable, and governments make huge rods to their own back whenever they claim to know what is going to happen in migration terms. I think that, to my mind, if I can just say that the most obvious thing, although it's understandable why Theresa May does not want to make a pronouncement on this yet, the obvious thing to my mind would be to say that all the EU nationals who are working in the UK on the 23rd of June of this year have the right to remain, and they have the right to stay, and to alleviate precisely the anxiety that Dawn referred to, and with the secondary benefit of not encouraging the kind of surge which you've rightly highlighted could well happen if one sets some later cut-off date.
But that surely, Dawn Foster, that would be the idea of making June the 23rd, the referendum day, the cut-off point. That would be vulnerable to legal challenge, wouldn't it? Douglas's idea of using the 23rd as the legal cut-off point, that would be vulnerable to legal challenge by some, surely.
Yes, definitely. I think a lot of people will have moved and even planned before Brexit to have moved to the UK. Then there will be legal challenges. The other big problem that we have, and we knew this before the Brexit vote happened, is that actually in the civil service we have we actually don't have the skills we need to exit the European Union properly. We've got some people in from Canada, and at the moment the immigration service is at breaking point. I mean, the PCS have been on strike at the borders, etc. We had so many cuts that the immigration service is really, really struggling at the moment. If we then add another layer onto that, and we remove free movement, then we really will be in crisis. So I think adding on all of these extra layers to kind of hamper immigration to the UK won't really work, because we don't have the funds to do it, and we don't have the skills to do it in the UK at the moment.
Douglas, a question. Sorry, go on.
Well, firstly, absolutely everything is open to legal challenge. There are people who are saying that if you did the cut-off date of June the 23rd, then there would be people who would plan to come the week after. Of course, that's going to be the case whenever you set the cut-off date, and let's accept it, in our highly legalistic society, absolutely everything is subject to potential legal challenge. So one can't really allow that to decide when such a policy should be implemented or backdated to. But as for this thing about it is true that there are all sorts of vulnerabilities in our immigration system. We're not as good as we should be. There is too much of a backlog about, among other things, asylum cases. There is too much of a backlog on a whole range of things, and too few people who are found not to have the right to remain here are remaining here. So all of these things, I agree with Dawn, we should have better investment, and we should be able to, for instance, return people who should not be in the UK. I agree with that. However, of course, one has to remember that the vote of the British people on the 23rd of June was to a very great extent about immigration, and about one thing in particular, which is about the right of the UK to decide our own border policies, and the right of the UK people to vote for a UK government that reflects and answers their wishes. And then, if they fail to answer our wishes, our right to vote them out. It was what we used to call democracy. It was woefully lacking until the 23rd of June. There were too few people who actually paid for errors within the EU system, and indeed in our own system when they failed, because let's remember, every politician always had the right, rightly or wrongly, to claim that this was an EU problem. Once we are out of the EU, no British government of any stripe, Labour, Conservative, Coalition or anything else, will be able to persuasively argue that. So we will be able to have not only a better immigration service, but a much more accountable immigration system in the UK.
Dawn Foster, how will the UK cope, public services, the economy generally, how will they cope without EU migration?
I think EU migration will, if it lowers, will massively impact on public services and the economy. It causes, I mean, we get so many skills in the EU that we struggle to fill in the UK. A lot of my friends are doctors. They're my age, just under 30, and they have loads and loads and loads of EU migrants in their hospitals, keeping them running, etc. But also, as well, I think that as soon as we cut down EU migration, and actually, if we end up leaving the single market, then our economy will suffer massively. Our public services are already at break-even point. They've been drastically cut, and now on top of this, we have this huge legislative bureaucratic nightmare of trying to exit the EU, put on top of everything else. So I think it will really struggle. And also, I think we will get to a point where Theresa May has said that she would like to remain in the single market, and Hollande and other people in the EU have said that there will be no entry into the single market without free movement. And I think at that point we reach a real struggle, because on the 23rd of June, most of the people who voted for Brexit were voting for the end of free movement, but will now have to contend with the fact that will also massively hurt our economy.
And Douglas, nature abhors a vacuum, doesn't it? And if those jobs that we're talking about are not being done by EU migrants, then chances are they'll be done by non-EU migrants, which might not go down well in certain parts of the country.
Oh, quite. I mean, that's a very important